even now in working with artists, but, even in working with mental health clients too, the first thing I am asking about is, or at least at the end of the first session, is like, what's going to be different about your life if this works for you? Where do you imagine yourself to be? And that is like the first seed of hope, because you're asking people to articulate where they want to go. And I think that it's opening up the possibilities for them about where they actually believe they can go. They start to think in terms of, like, what do I hope for myself?
Welcome to Journeys Through Change, a podcast that inspires women to let go of the fear and say yes to possibility. I'm your host, Noelle Van, an author, creator, and empowerment coach who spent years in corporate America helping innovators and leaders ride the waves of change with ease and grace. I now work with women to step into change and unleash the power they have to create a life they love. Whether you're contemplating a change in your career, relationship, health, lifestyle, or anything in between, nothing's off the table. I'll be offering up simple insights to help you manage the ups and downs of change and sharing interviews with successful women who took a leap of faith to create the life they knew they were meant to live, sharing their wisdom, advice, and all the juicy lessons they learned along the way. So get cozy in your favorite comfy chair and let's get started. The dictionary definition of hope is a feeling of trust or expectation, a desire for something to happen. When we think about hope, it can often feel like it's an aspiration or yearning. But in reality, hope is the first step in becoming a believer in your ability to overcome life's challenges. In this episode, Rebecca Boedges discusses how hope has guided her throughout her life in times of tragedy and triumph, ultimately leading her from her work as a therapist into the world of coaching for emerging artists. Rebecca has been a psychotherapist, coach, and consultant in private practice for 15 years. She holds master's degrees in organizational psychology and mental health counseling, with additional training in somatic psychotherapy, specializing in trauma and women's work. She shares with us how through the tragedy of a stillbirth and several miscarriages, as well as the joy in the birth of her 2 daughters, she found strength in family and a newfound passion in supporting the artist community she loves. Rebecca stepped into the world of coaching emerging artists after spending years co-managing the business side of her husband Mark's career, as he rose to master artist, gaining international recognition for his work. They have co-founded a creative coaching practice that offers individual support and retreats for artists interested in learning how to get their business out into the world without sacrificing their creativity. Rebecca, we are so happy to have you join us.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'm very excited.
I'm so excited. Well, Rebecca, you have quite a winding road that you have been down. And I'm just so happy that you agreed to share a little bit of it with us. So what I thought we might do is I kind of wanted to start at a really pivotal moment in your life that seems to be one of the catalysts for many of the changes to follow. I know you had a very painful experience with the loss of your daughter and several miscarriages on your path to having children. So maybe you could walk us through that experience a bit.
Sure. When I was in graduate school, wrapping up graduate school in about 2008, I guess, we decided to start having children. And I think, like most women, without any other information about fertility, we just thought, oh, we're just going to get pregnant and have kids because that's what you do. And we started on that journey and got pregnant really quickly. And within 6 weeks, I had a really quick miscarriage. And so the doctor sort of encouraged us to go ahead and just give this another shot. So we did. Within a couple months, very easily pregnant again, and everything progressed pretty naturally. And I was finishing up grad school. Mark was working full-time and painting full-time, because there was always this dream of him having a full-time art career, which we all sort of know the starving artist narrative. So we were trying to figure out how we were going to make that happen. And in about 10 or 11 weeks, I ended up having another miscarriage, which I did at home, which I wouldn't do again. I don't recommend it. But at that time, and actually I used a medication, which is now sort of becoming controversial, to help me miscarry at home. And after that, the doctor said, really, after 2 miscarriages, unless you have 3 in a row, there's nothing statistically significant. So keep trying. And after that, it took us a long time to get pregnant again. And during that time, I was feeling kind of discouraged. So my dad asked if it would be okay to have a meeting with his shaman. And I said, sure. So we went to my parents' house in Connecticut, and Nick, the shaman who had predicted that my dad would not die of stage 4 salivary gland cancer, which he didn't, sat in a room with me and my husband and my dad, filled it all up with smoke, and told me that you are chosen because you are strong to have babies come through you that have short journeys on this earth. And you will have a daughter first. And so I held on to those words because I thought he knows, A, I'm going to have more children for sure. And B, I'm going to have a daughter. But he said it in kind of an odd way. And so I always kind of stuck with me. And then he went on to name a couple injuries that my husband had that I didn't even know he had. And so it was a little bit of magic in that room. And then about a month later, I got pregnant with a girl, and everything was progressing as it should. But then towards the end of the pregnancy, I was feeling like things weren't progressing, like I wasn't big enough. And so when I went into the doctor for the last ultrasound at around 32 weeks, they went in to measure me, and she said, you're a little tiny, but we'll do an ultrasound in 2 more weeks if you still seem small. And so I left that visit, and I still was feeling a little like, okay. It was about 5 days later that I was taking my dog out for a walk. And I took my dog to a dog park that was like totally empty at the time. And it was like 4 o'clock in November. And then that dog park was empty, and I'm pretty pregnant. So I took my dog to another park. And that dog park was totally empty. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to take my dog just to walk through this like little ravine in the woods near my house. And we're about a mile from an airport. So it's loud, lots of traffic, daylight. And as I'm taking my dog Shelby for this walk, this huge, huge bird like soars down right in front of me and lands in this tree, not but like 15 feet away. And this huge bird, it's an owl, and it's sitting up on a branch not too far off the ground. And for something in me just compelled me to walk towards it. And I walked towards it with my big dog. She's like 65 pounds. I stood underneath her, and I looked up at her, and she looked at me dead in the eyes. And I said out loud, I said, "Why are you here?" And my heart sank. I just knew like she was there to tell me something. And I kept talking to her, and Shelby's next to me. It was like we were having our own little ceremony in the woods. And finally, I was the one that had to leave her in the woods, which felt significant. She didn't leave me. And so I left, and I went home, and I actually cried. I called my mom, and I said, "Mom, I just had this visit from an owl, and it felt like she had something to tell me." And my mom said, "Yeah, when you look in an owl's eyes, it looks like another person is staring back at you." And I said, "Yeah, it felt like that." Anyway, I couldn't shake this. The next morning I said, "Mark, I don't know. I haven't been feeling our daughter move that much, and I'm feeling kind of nervous. So it's like, let's just go in for an ultrasound," kind of like the, new mom jitters. And we're like, well, it's, we're 33 weeks. She could be delivered if something's wrong. And so I went in, and the nurse was like looking for the heartbeat. And I knew when she was putting the monitor on me, she couldn't find it. And she was kind of joking like, "Oh, sometimes they hide at 33 weeks. And I was like, no, I know she's not hiding. And so that's when we found that our daughter had died, and that something was wrong with the placenta, and there was no fluid, and she was gone. And so immediately we started in with the process of delivering her. And when I went into the hospital, I shared my story with the nurses. The nurse then went and researched sort of the symbolism of owls, and she brought back all this literature about how owls in Native American culture they are known to ferry the dead. And so I knew in that moment that owl was a symbol of my daughter. And to this day, as you can even see behind me, I have a picture of an owl. My relationship now is as much with owls as it is with the daughter that I never really knew on this earthly plane. And after that, I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to have children. I wasn't sure if like the same thing was going to happen again. So we met with a lot of doctors. And in the middle of all this, I'm launching a career. Mark is launching his art career, and we are trying to also birth a family. And so at that time, I wasn't sure I was going to have the strength and the courage to go through another pregnancy. So that was in 2010. And then we actually did go through a round of IUI, which was unsuccessful very quickly. And then I finally got pregnant with my daughter, Ella, who I was nervous during the pregnancy. Everyone said, no, the thing that happens with your first daughter, it's no big deal. The doctors were saying it's a rare occurrence. It doesn't reoccur. But I wasn't so sure, and I was pretty nervous. And so when I got pregnant with Ella at about 18 weeks, I wanted them to test this same thing that would sort of let me know if we were on the same track that we were with our first daughter, and this hormone level, which they didn't really test anymore, but they did. And around 18 weeks, I had a dream that Mark and I were walking on a beach, and it was a dark, kind of misty, foggy, ethereal beach. And there was just a bunch of mist over the water. And Mark and I were walking. And then out from that mist comes this sort of androgynous young child that stands, like runs up in between us and grabs our hands. You know how you're like swinging your hands, like your little kid is swinging their hands. And this child is swinging their hands and is looking up at me and looking up at Mark. And I kept saying to this child, you made it. You made it this time. You made it. You made it. And so I woke up from that dream and I told Mark the dream, and I'm like, the same thing's going to happen again, but this baby's going to make it. And so sure enough, at 20 weeks, we found out that this hormone was off. And then at 24 weeks, I went in for measurements, and Ella was really small, like in the less than 10th percentile at 24 weeks, which is really tiny. They could deliver her that day. What I did was I just told all the doctors that no, she was going to make it to 28 weeks, which is sort of the mark for kids. You really want your babies to get to 28 weeks. It reduces a lot of risks for health issues and survival, increases survival. And I told all the doctors in the room about my dream, and I'm like, they're going to think I'm crazy. But the one thing that I felt like I could do starting parenting at 18, 20 weeks was instill hope in myself and everyone around me. And I wanted all the doctors who were going to be caring for me and Ella to believe that she was a fighter and she was going to make it. So I told them this story and I told them this dream. And from there, they said, you can deliver her right now, or you can go home for 2 weeks. And I'm like, nope, I'm going to go home for 2 weeks. And I went home for 2 weeks, and all I did was read stories of babies that were born as preemies, that were healthy, babies that were, small and that made it. And there weren't a lot of stories out there. So I just kept rereading the ones of success. Yeah. And I would tell her every day that you are loved, you are strong, you're going to make it. And I felt like I had so much terror that I was going to go through the same pain that we had gone through just a couple years earlier, that the only thing I could do was control my hope. And so I felt like my job as mom was to like feed and fuel my hope, and feed and fuel the hope of like everybody around me. Just because we know, like in terms of medical conditions and even like the mental health fields, hope is sort of like the number one predictor for the outcome of most success in therapy. Is like, does my client believe that I can help them? Do they believe they can get better? And if that's there, it usually can happen. I clung to that.
And I think you've mentioned this to me before, that oftentimes, because hope is a big thread with you. I mean, it feels like that has really fueled you throughout this process of these many years where you've been going through some of the struggles of getting to a place where, now you have a thriving family and all of that. But I want to say, when I think about, I think you've mentioned with your clients that you will kind of start there with them. Like you start with hope.
So even now in working with artists, but, even in working with mental health clients too, the first thing I am asking about is, or at least at the end of the first session, is like, what's going to be different about your life if this works for you? Where do you imagine yourself to be? And that is like the first seed of hope, because you're asking people to articulate where they want to go. And I think that it's opening up the possibilities for them about where they actually believe they can go. They start to think in terms of, like, what do I hope for myself? And then I'm kind of getting at like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how practical or how much do you think that can actually happen? You know what I mean? And if someone's at a 2, it's like, my first job is to get them up to an 8 or 10. And I will often think of myself too as sort of the hope holder in the room, because also it's like, we want to be a professional artist or want to do something that feels impossible, like, climb Everest. It's like, if we can't hold the hope for ourselves that the possibility is there for us, the first job to making it happen is surrounding ourselves with people who believe in us. Because it's like the believers in the room, like Nick, the shaman, the believer in the room, he was really the seed for me, because at that time I wasn't really believing I was necessarily going to go on and have children or healthy children. And so it's like really important. I see myself in that role. So it's like I'm assessing hope, and then I am also the cheerleader, which is ultimately, I think in terms of how I frame myself in relationship to Mark and his career, is like I was always his number one fan. I was always his biggest cheerleader. He would always say, Rebecca, I have no hope. I have no faith in this. And I'm like, yeah, because that's my job. I hold all the hope and faith that you are going to be a professional artist one day, which he is now, right? Like before he left his full-time job, he had a really good IT job. He had a pension. Like, who has pensions anymore, right? Pension, benefits, 401k, like everything you could imagine in a very stable job. And he could have been there for the rest of his life. Like, it was a very stable company. They would have always found a home for him, even if his job went away. Like, he could have had a very stable everything for all of us for the rest of his life. And I was like, this is not enough for us. This is not enough for you. You're going to leave this. And after Ella was a year old, after we like went through NICU and all of that, after she was a year old, I said, okay, you have done 2 full-time jobs long enough. We have opened a gallery, had this child, like, I'm done doing all of it. Like, you have to make a go of it now or never. And so I started telling people he was quitting his job before he had decided he was quitting his job. So everyone around him was saying like, oh my gosh, Mark, you're going to be a full-time artist, before he was totally on board with it. But then it was kind of like the story was already out there and the train was like headed down the tracks. And so he was like, okay, I guess this is what we're doing.
I'm really interested in, when did the kernel of hope kind of start with you? Was it before you had the challenges, or has this been the way that you've been all your life?
I think there's a part of me that has just always been eternally hopeful, and in a very positive way, and also maybe in a little bit like dysfunctional way, like thinking something's going to change that never really is going to change. But I think that's kind of what makes me good at what I do. But I do think there's just probably always been a part of me. Even now, actually, I'm kind of thinking of a story where I went back and visited some old friends quite a few years ago, and was sharing a story with them about a situation with another like group about like, gosh, I really thought this was going to change. And they kind of laughed and they're like, oh my gosh, Rebecca, you've always been the eternal optimist since you were like a little kid. Like, you see the best in people, you see the brightest in people and potential as much as what's in front of you. So I think maybe there's always been this element for me of hope, but I definitely think the struggles that I went through, especially in losing a child, it was like I had lived through the worst thing like I could imagine for myself in this lifetime. And living through something like that was also incredibly freeing, because pursuing dreams and like things like an art career after that felt like, what's the worst thing that's going to happen?
Right.
Bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Like, we have to sell everything and we have to go like live in a very small apartment. And, we're both educated, like find a couple of jobs that feel sort of mediocre. And that to me was like the worst thing that can happen. And because I'd already been through hell, it was like, this is like, there's nothing that scares me now when it comes to making changes. So I do think that's the gift of going through something so hard and so traumatic in life. And I think when we can like make meaning of it, it can provide fuel for organizing ourselves around change. But it's when we can't find meaning. Like, I do feel like the meaning of our first daughter was partly launching us into, like Mark and I, into our truest selves, him becoming a full-time artist. Because we opened our first gallery like a year after she was born. So it was a year to the day. And I said, okay, Mark, we're going to open a gallery just with your name on it, even though everyone says that's a terrible idea and you can't run a business like that. That fuels me. I'm like, I love hearing you can't do that.
Well, and did you feel that you needed to get him on board with that? Because I know that you were kind of the engine behind this, but talk a little bit about how you helped him evolve the business.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think from day one, and this story that I kind of share with like his audience quite a bit, is when we first started dating and he was painting in his garage. I didn't know anything about art when we first met, but there was something about his work where I felt like, oh, this guy's pretty good. And so without his knowing, I signed him up for the Denver Student Art League fair for like amateurs. And then he actually got in. And so then I had to tell him that I pitched him for this show. And I was like, well, if he doesn't get in, he's never going to know. And if he gets in, we'll figure it out. And so I got him in, and then he's like, oh my gosh, Rebecca. And we made some really bad decisions around framing. Like we had no money, like no money. So we stained wood and cut frames, which is like, anyone that's listening that is an artist, it's like horrific that we would do that and actually hang the stuff, but we did. And we were so young, maybe we got away with it. And that first weekend, he sold out, and it happened to be like a gallery owner who was also a frame shop was 2 tents down from us. And people were bringing his art, obviously, to get reframed because it was so bad. And they would go to get it reframed. And then the owner of the gallery saw Mark's work. And so he sold out that show. And then at the end of that show, invited Mark to be represented in her gallery. That was his first gallery representation. And then with the money from that weekend, he bought my engagement ring.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Yep. And so that was like the start of sort of me pushing him and his art out the door. And then to this day, he would say, like, if I hadn't met Rebecca, I'd still be painting a garage by myself somewhere with stacks of painting all around me. And I think that's true of most creative people. Like,
yeah.
I don't feel like a lot of creative people, there's like the select few that sort of have that business savvy and the creative side. But I think most artists need help with that business side, which is what now I feel like, yeah, I get to do in my work as well.
So talk a little bit about, I know that you've supported him in his journey and kind of gotten him going. And now the two of you have come together with this. How did that sort of evolve for you? How did you step away a little bit from what you're currently doing to then say, okay, I'm going to kind of go all in and really make this something for both of us?
You know, I would say over the last 5 years or so, he's really become more and more independent, and his career has become so big that I'm just sort of in the background for big decisions like, are we going to start doing reproductions? Let's talk about that. Things like that, like a little bit more strategy. But in the day-to-day of like marketing or business development and like who we need to meet, I mean, his career is at a place where he doesn't really need me for that. And so I haven't been doing that as much, but there's a part of me that's been craving helping other artists get out there, because I feel like there is this narrative of the starving artist, and I just don't buy it. I feel like if you can figure out what your strengths are, not just in art, but like what your interpersonal strengths are, or maybe what your other skills are, you really can build a career and a lifestyle that works for you. Mm-hmm. And I just think now more than ever, like coming out of COVID and the creative process, like so many things in our culture, is just getting swallowed up by technology and whatever. So I just feel like I don't know, I've just been being pulled in that direction. And so last fall, and this is kind of how I work. It's like I'll get a pull. I have a tug. I have a pull. I'm like, okay, I'm listening. Universe, I'm listening. And then all of a sudden, I don't know what it was. I was like, Mark, we're going to go on your Instagram and we're going to talk for a few minutes about this 2-hour workshop that we're going to launch in November about the business of art. And we're going to get this many people to sign up. And this is what we're going to do. And he's like, Rebecca, what? And I'm like, yeah, this is what we're going to do. So we just went live on his Instagram, answered a bunch of questions. And I said, this is what we're doing. And I hadn't really put together the whole workshop at all. And I filled up the workshop, and then I put the workshop together after I filled it up, because I'm like, I don't want to spend the time putting this together if nobody wants it. And then we did a 2-hour workshop. And then I was like, okay, in this 2-hour workshop, we're going to talk about how we made it, what the business has looked like, some of the things to think about. And then what I want to do from there is launch this retreat where you help coach their art and I coach their business, and we help people get into galleries. And so then that's what we did. And we filled that up in January, and I'm helping clients get into galleries, and 2 of them are in galleries, although they have I've supported them, but their connections have ultimately made it happen. But yeah, and it feels so rewarding.
I just love that. Because Rebecca, the thing I see with you is that you're the backbone, obviously, of the organization. Right? You're the backbone of it.
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, but Mark is very willing to, it's almost like you're giving him that nudge to kind of, put himself out there, but then you're right alongside helping on the business side of things. Have you, in your work currently with emerging artists, what do you see are some of the, I don't know, stumbling blocks for them?
Yeah, I would say what I sort of see is it's really hard for artists to see themselves and their work. accurately. So there's a tremendous amount of perfectionism. And I'm really working in a very specific genre. So this is representational art. Just a tremendous amount of fear of not being good enough. And I think if I was to sort of distill that into like all my work that I do, I think whenever I'm working with someone in a therapeutic setting, when I'm getting to the core of the therapy, usually always comes to some element of, for whatever reason, I learned I wasn't lovable in this way, right? And it's like, how do I learn to find this part of me lovable? And in a way with artists, it's like their art is like their biggest gift and their biggest hang up. And so I feel like my job is to free them of that burden and help them get their art out into the world where other people can enjoy it in the same way that they enjoy making it. And I tell this to all my artists that are making art, that when people buy art, I mean, there are different reasons people buy art. It can be, to collect, and it could be like, I want something to look good in this room. But I said, a lot of people look at a painting and it's the feeling that they get when they look at your work. And so it's not so much about the technical execution and making sure all your shadows are in the right values. And yes, all that's important. It needs to be well done, but it's how you make people feel. And so I think when I can help artists tap into something, and I think it's because they're channeling something greater than themselves. I really do. And when they tap into that and that translates to the canvas and people feel it, I feel like artists can be successful. So I feel like it's sort of helping artists see what their gift is and then giving them sort of the avenues to go and deliver it. And I'm their cheerleaders. There's a lot of fear around like, am I good enough to be in this gallery? It's like, yes, absolutely. And it's amazing when you have someone in your court, you think about kids and you're just like, you're great. You're fine. You're exactly how you are. And, maybe even perfectly mediocre. Cause I think sometimes we get into like, you're, telling our kids they're so great at everything. And then they have a complex because they're not. It's like, you're so awesomely but that goes so far. And as adults, we don't have that, as much. So I sort of see myself in that role.
What would be a good way of helping someone if you were talking to them and they didn't have any hope? What would you suggest somebody to do to get to that place mentally?
Well, there's a couple, I think little tricks that, I've used. One is like after we lost our daughter, I mean, I was feeling pretty hopeless about life in general. Right. And I knew it was really important to move because grief and sadness and hopelessness and things like that, they get stuck in the body and our bodies get stuck. So moving while focusing on the emotional or the emotion, I think is really important. But getting stuck is seductive. So when I felt really hopeless after our daughter, I mean, I did spend a couple weeks just curled up in my bed under my covers, just like, oh gosh, I just want to be cloaked in darkness and stillness. But there was something, a little like flame in me that was like, you cannot stay in this place for too long because this place will stay and will hold you, will kind of like root into stone. So after a few weeks, I said, okay, every day, Rebecca, when you're feeling like this, you get yourself 10 minutes, you set a timer, 10 minutes. You get 10 minutes to be hopeless and stuck. And I would set my timer. I would get into a really deep, dark place and my timer would go off. And I would say to myself, okay, it doesn't matter how you feel about moving and getting up and doing the next thing. It's just getting up and doing it. So my relationship to what I'm doing next and what I'm doing are two different things. And I need to move the hopelessness. And so I would do that either through, I would make myself get up and feeling the hopelessness, go for a walk, dance, move, do some yoga. Like I just would make my body move with the hopelessness. And so whether it's like hopelessness about an art career or hopelessness about having children or whatever it might be, it's important to feel the feeling, but to move with the feeling because that's what shifts it and moves us out of it over time. But it's when we don't move with it, it kind of consumes us and we get stuck. And even in our body's energy, like the movement gets stuck, that we can really stay in that place for a long time. So I think I shared with you too, even my dad passed away last April, almost a year now, April 27th, it'll be a year. And this past winter, because I live in a dark climate and cold up in Vermont, northern Vermont, this winter I thought I can't head into this winter with this grief because it's going to get stuck. And so I started hiking this mountain close to my house a few times a week, just to make sure that when I was there, like I was grieving, but I was moving with my grief. And it was hard. Like I was outside, below 20, below 15, I wouldn't hike, but I made myself go out there, which isn't an easy thing to do. But for me, I've just really learned that you have to move the feelings and emotions, and you can only allow yourself to be like still and alone with them. Otherwise they become part of your identity, and it becomes harder and harder to move them.
Yeah. Rebecca, it is so interesting how the twists and turns of your life have been, just in terms of really stepping into something new. I mean, you've been a therapist for many years. So have you, in terms of kind of next steps with this new venture with Mark, what's coming up next?
Well, I've been working on this book forever, which now it's kind of funny that, I started doing this work and I've been working on this book for many years. And now I feel like the reason I wrote the memoir is actually because of this work now that I am doing. Like it all ties together.
Yeah.
And it was kind of setting me up actually to do this work and be in service in this way. So I'm going to continue, growing the coaching and taking on clients. I am hoping to get some speaking opportunities in there's a couple like large publications that do conventions and things like that. And so I'm going to be hoping to like move more into those areas, hopefully finish my book, and then continue to do yearly retreats with Mark, just based on his teaching schedule and everything. I'm not sure we can swing more than one a year, but I'm not exactly sure. I feel like I kind of work intuitively. So I don't know if this is going to grow kind of like a mentorship community or, what is going to come out of it. But I definitely feel aligned in sort of my whole life experience has brought me to this moment and to our work together.
Well, and just to make a side note on the book. So Rebecca and I know each other from a writing group that we've been a part of. And first of all, your writing is amazing. And I think that your story there's so much to your story. And I think that's been one of your biggest, working on the memoir has been difficult because there's so many different things you could talk about. There's so many different things you could share with people. That is so important. And I thank you, first of all, for just sharing even a piece of what is going on with you, because I think that so much more is yet to come. And it sounds like you guys have such a wonderful business moving forward, like a business opportunity with a group that I feel like is just going to really benefit from what you have to offer. Because I think emerging artists, your background is so perfect for anybody starting a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that you are such a hopeful person and that you have such a belief in making things happen, that's huge, right? For all of us to have that. But I just want to thank you so much for joining us and for providing us with such a valuable perspective on hope and healing. You have really a gift of looking inward and listening to your inner guidance. So you're really an example for all of us in how to face change and move through really difficult times with such grace.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been great. Pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your powerful story.
Thank you.
So that's it for now. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Journeys Through Change podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or really wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us and leave a review if you've enjoyed this episode. And share it with a friend or on social media to spread the good word, so more women like you can find us and join in on the fun. For more information on the podcast or Day by Day book, go to livedaybyday.com.